We have important guests here today discussing development aid and the new book by Matti of Heroes, Development Aid, Blessing or Curse. And before I let the chair introduce the speakers and herself, I'll just say a few words on practical things. So there are some feedback forms there placed on some of the seats, so please fill them out. And the session will last approximately until 1:30. So we will try to keep it in that time, but we'll see how it goes. So I will give the word now to Olli Hakkarainen from Kepa. Thank you.
Yes, thank you on my behalf as well. Yes, I guess we are going to have really interesting like 80 minutes. Huge amount of issues, and we have really three persons here.
It's quite difficult to hear.
Okay, then there is something. It wasn't on. Sorry, now better.
Yes.
Okay, again. Okay, yes, welcome on my behalf as well. I'm Olli from Kepa, and we are going to have like 80 minutes time for discussion, huge amount of interesting issues. And we have three persons with decades of different kind of experience on the development issues. So we have Heidi here, well known here for the Finnish audience, and the previous Minister for International Development, and now is the Member of Parliament in the EU. And then we have Presa, who is the Executive Director from Post Trust from Bangladesh. And then we have Matti Kääriäinen, who did a really long career, like 4 decades, Minister of Foreign Affairs as Ambassador and Development Policy Advisor, and who recently published a book within the Kustannuus on the development aid. And we have been planning so that we will have 3 parts in the discussion. So first, the first round, where we try to answer, or the panelists will answer to the question of the session. Is it curse or blessing development aid? So I will ask them to bring up also very concrete examples, achievements, lessons learned, and so forth. So they each have like 5-7 minutes for that. And then after that, I'm presenting them a couple of topics, current topics. You can discuss with them, and there's certain specific questions for each of them relating to their experience. And then at the end, we have like 20 minutes for questions from the audience and discussions anyone of the panelists would like to rise up. So I think if you could just start from here. Oh, I'm sorry. In fact, we actually got Matti will start. Sorry, because he has now the microphone there and ready for it.
Okay, thank you, Outi. Thank you for this opportunity to come and talk about this issue once again. I have actually prepared some written remarks to start, to kick off the thing, and just to make the point clear. About this question, is the aid, development aid, blessing or curse? It's of course a black and white question, and in this real world I think very few things are either black or white completely, so it depends very much on how you do things and what is your analysis. And I would say that if your analysis is not correct, you will easily end up doing wrong things, and then of course it becomes a curse. And I would argue here that very much of the traditional development aid has become a curse just for that reason. And in the following I will go through 3 arguments or views to describe how I see the situation. These are covering 10 years, more or less. I have to admit first that I stole the name of the book from a study which was published in 2005, covering 108 countries, and the name of the study was The Curse of Aid. That study was covering also 4 decades, so long-term research. So it was found that in that study that the foreign aid has a negative impact on democracy. The reason for carrying out this research was actually the finding established by many studies early on, showing negative correlation between economic growth and natural resources, a phenomenon often called the curse of natural resources. However, oil and other minerals may not be the biggest curse in developing countries. In many of them, the amount of foreign aid is far larger share of government revenues. The conclusion of this study was that being dependent on foreign aid seems to result in worsening democratic institutions, and that the effect of aid is a bigger curse than oil. The negative impact was found both in political as well as economical institutions. In addressing pretty much the same observation 5 years later, the well-known Zambian economist Dambisa Moyo, in her book Dead Aid, uses the expression vicious cycle of aid when describing the negative impact of aid on recipient countries. This means that development aid props up corrupt governments, providing them with freely usable cash. These corrupt governments interfere with the rule of law, the establishment of transparent civil institutions, and the protection of civil liberties, making both domestic and foreign investment in poor countries unattractive. In response to growing poverty, donors give more aid, which continues the downward spiral of poverty. This vicious cycle of aid chokes off desperately needed investment, instills a culture of dependency, and facilitates rampant and systematic corruption, all with negative consequences for growth. This cycle guarantees economic failure in the poorest aid-dependent countries. Another more recent perspective explaining the poor results of development aid was actually published only a couple of months ago by Land Pritchett, the professor of practice of international development at Harvard University. He drew the attention to the missing focus and lack of common agenda between the donors and the recipient countries in his essay entitled, "Can Rich Countries Be Reliable Partners for National Development?" What Pritchett is saying is that across the board, rich countries are backing away from the national development goals of poor countries, such as broad-based prosperity and effective government, towards a narrow agenda of low-bar goals, such as reducing dollar-a-day poverty, access to primary schooling, basic water and sanitation. This trend of, is using a very interesting expression, defining development down among the development agencies controlled by rich countries makes them increasingly unreliable and irrelevant partners for citizens and governments of developing countries. In other words, the rich countries' priorities for development aid are not shared by the developing countries. According to the Center for Global Development Studies, only 7% of the Africans named health, 4% education, and 1% governance as among the top 3 problems that the government should address. On the other hand, 71% mention jobs or income, 52% mention infrastructure, and 63% economic and financial policies among their top 3 problems. According to Pritchett, what the rich country post-material development NGOs want development assistance to give isn't what the developing country governments and often their citizens want as development assistance. There is, of course, maybe a difference between what the governments want and what the citizens by and large want in many cases. Therefore, developing countries can no longer count on rich countries as reliable partners for their national development agendas, because the rich country domestic coalition is too reliant on citizens and groups with post-material agendas. As a result, Pritchett notes, existing development organizations, both multilateral and bilateral, will be unable to remake themselves enough to remain relevant to the national development agendas of poor countries. It is probable that they will become increasingly limited players, with new organizations rising to prominence as development actors in the 21st century. As a conclusion, in the light of the above, it should not be a surprise that, to the contrary of the official statements talking about the improvement in the poverty situation, for example in poverty situation, the fact is that it is actually getting worse. The false impression has been created by focusing on proportions rather than absolute numbers, by shifting the poverty line downward in absolute terms, and by claiming China's gains against poverty in the 1990s. But if we look absolute numbers and if we take China out of equation, we see the global poverty headcount is exactly the same today as it was in 1981. The worst development can be seen in the region which has been the most aid-dependent area. It is Sub-Saharan Africa. In Sub-Saharan Africa, the number of poor people living in extreme poverty in 1981 was 215 million. Since then, it has doubled in spite of $1 trillion given as development aid. But the growing number of scholars are beginning to insist that the situation is even worse than this. In many countries, $1.25 per day is simply not adequate for human existence, to say nothing of human dignity. It has been suggested that if people are to achieve normal life expectancy, they need roughly triple the current poverty line. If we do that, about 3.5 billion people, nearly half the world's population, would fall below this line. Since 1981, around 500 million people have been added to the ranks of the extremely poor, if this more reasonable criteria would be used. At the same time, the wealth ratio between the richest and the poorest countries has grown tremendously. In 1973, the gap was around 44 to 1. Today, it is nearly 80 to 1. Inequality has reached such extremes that now the richest 67 people in the world have more wealth than the poorest 3.5 billion. This is the real crisis of development, and the traditional way of giving development aid has not helped to improve the situation, but may have worsened it and prevented the making of necessary structural changes to improve the situation. The way out, the problem could be solved to some extent by addressing the real reasons behind the problems. It is the imbalances in the global economy, putting an end to structural adjustment, preventing illicit capital flows from developing countries, addressing the problems of tax avoidance by multinational companies, closing down the tax havens, cancelling debts, democratizing global institutions, placing a moratorium on land grabs, and suspending free trade deals until they can be renegotiated under more democratic and transparent conditions. But if we stick to the present practices of development aid, pretending that the situation is getting better and that aid works, we are fooling ourselves and letting down those that we are claiming to assist, the poorest of the poor. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Martin. I think we could do so now. It's okay that it's the...
The question is whether development aid is blessing or curse. If I say curse, I'm sure that if there is any journalist in room, he will immediately pick up and he will make a headline tomorrow, because in our world, media look for the negative news because it has a market. So I will not do that. Aid is not curse. Okay, let's demystify the terminology, the term, the very word, whether aid is aid or something else. First hypothesis is that I'm from a country like Bangladesh. It was under the British colony for 250 years. During 1947, we have got independence from British colony, and it was under Pakistan colony for 25 years. We got the real independence during 1971. And you know what happens during the 250 years? The British rulers cut the fingers of our artisans, that they are not allowed to prepare cloths by the handlooms. What was happening? Our cottons and other, everything was exported to UK. Then all the textile industries in UK preparing the cloths and again importing to our countries. And you know, Nobel laureate Amrita Sen, we had a big famine in 1943, and he has found that during that time, the Indian and Bangladesh and Bengal subcontinent has paid highest amount of revenue to the British colony. So, I don't know what you will say. I don't want to say that this is a reparations. What are the resources? What are the exploitations you have done in our countries, especially in southern countries? We are demanding reparations. Now it is up to you whether you will say aid or reparations. Next, come to the second premise. According to the Eurodag, one of the NGO network in Europe, they have studied that each of $1 investment as an aid to the southern countries, $9 repatriated as an interest of loan and as a illicit flow. The Christian Aid has studied that annually. Christian Aid is an NGO based in UK. They have studied that in each year 130 billion aid is going to the developing countries, southern countries. But in lieu of that, 300 billion illicit flow goes to the tax haven and developed countries. So, what is the mathematics? What is the figures? That if you do $1 investment as an aid in the third world countries, in the southern countries, $9 and $3 flow as a credit interest and illicit flow to the developed countries. What I can say? Is it return of our stolen money? You will decide it. The next question. Okay, there is other side of coin too. The question whether aid works or not works. Look at Bangladesh. Every day you will listen all the odd stories. Industrial disaster, Rana Plaza disaster, climate disasters. Today may be earthquake disasters. But other side of coin is that, but amid all the odds, Bangladesh has achieved tremendously in respect of MDG, Millennium Development Goal. Number one, we have 100% gender parity in primary school and junior high school enrollment. Male, female, 100%. During 70s, in each 1,000 infant birth, there was around 300 to 400 infant mortality. Now it is came down to below 100. Okay, what else more? Maternal mortality, it was 1,000 in 100,000 pregnant women. Now it has gone down to, gone down to 200s. Okay, during 70s, after the independence, aid contribution to the budget, national budget, it was more than 70%. Now, because of the different trade and other things, aid dependency reduced to the almost 10 to 15%. So, aid works. The question is corruptions. We corruption from the ethical perspective of the things. But in developing countries, where the democratic institutions are weak, sometimes corruption is a survival for the mid-level poor, middle-class families. Corruption is there, struggle is there, movement for democracy is there, and it is a developing society. The last but not least, why I am here? Because of the development aid. So what we need, it is the people's solidarity for a equal, for a just pace global society. Look at the situation of the climate change. What you have the share in ionosphere, I have the same share. And we have to make a planet where our climate is secure, where our people has got the livelihood. So let us work for an alternative global planet.
Thank you, Rasa. And now Heidi.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we got a very good start for our discussion because now we have perhaps heard that there are some nuances in what aid is and what it is supposed to be. And obviously I was very thankful for Resa's remark that had he chosen to speak about development aid as a curse, he might make headlines even in this country, because as we know, the book that is here advertised and promoted, which I have read already months ago, it made very big head titles. As an elected member of parliament, I couldn't even imagine how much publicity the author has gotten compared with my modest chances to talk to the public via the media. But anyway, I think my answer is that aid is not a curse, neither is it a blessing. It really depends on what we mean by aid. And I appreciate the perspective of our guest Resal in the sense that he speaks about reparation. I would say that development aid and financing of development should be understood as a kind of a global tax, which is something that we from the rich industrialized, post-industrialized north have to pay back. But we have to do it in a real way and not fake development. I also believe that the issue is very much about how to create a kind of a pathway towards reducing aid dependency. But aid can have a tremendous impact on the way towards coming to an end with aid dependency. And there I would say that we probably all agree that the new kind of orientations that should be taken are in the domain of global economic governance, in the transparency of taxation systems, the continuous persistent efforts to curb and close tax havens, which are indeed a big problem of resource stealth, I would say, from the developing countries. But also, as we know, it has become an issue in the richer countries as the taxpayers are realizing that the austerity measures are at least partly considered necessary because of the kind of loss of tax revenues. So it is again, it's a common global challenge that needs global answers, and their development aid can be very helpful. Because, for instance, now the Finnish government is supporting several networks and projects where the aim is exactly to curb tax evasion and illicit capital flows. The latest is that Finland is supporting tax administrations in countries like Tanzania so that they would be able to control the international companies which operate in particular in the natural resource sector. So I would say that coming to an end of aid dependency should be the goal of development aid. And I was very pleased to hear that in Bangladesh this dependency has come dramatically down to 10 to 15%. I would say that it probably is one of the best results that we know of. Then when we talk about development aid as a curse or a blessing, I think we have to understand that, of course, mechanical, very simplistic measures of poverty are not enough anymore. But we are 15, 16, 17 years behind or after when the Millennium Development Goals were defined and that poverty measure was, absolute poverty measure was put in place. Now we are looking at many different kind of indicators of poverty. We also have to understand that poverty can be poverty of meager possibilities to have a say in society, being socially excluded. So we have to look at many different ways which are expressions of poverty and try to address them. And there I would say that key in all development aid should be that to fight against inequalities. Now, of course, Matti Kääriäinen makes a very attractive claim by saying that inequalities have risen dramatically as development aid has been given. Now, seriously, I don't believe that development aid as such is the reason of these growing inequalities. The growing inequalities mainly are due to the dynamics of global economy, and which is reflected in the fact that across all the globe, in all societies, some people have better possibilities to benefit from global economy, free movement of whatever, than others. And development aid could be a very good tool also to help governments to deal with inequalities. But of course, I mean, ironically, I think Matti is right when he says that governments are not really interested in these things. And you described very well, Matti, how the governments are interested in infrastructure and that kind of investments rather than helping people on access to health and education. Of course, you said it yourself, the governments are not the people. In most developing countries, governments are really not reflecting the needs of people, and that's why they also don't address inequalities. So I believe that also development aid can take the shape of, for instance, budget support, because we have some very good examples of, now again from Tanzania is my example, that when it was discovered that there are major problems of maladministration, corruption in the administration, then the donors said, well, if you don't address these problems, we're stopping with the budget aid. And this is how it should, I think it should work like that, because that will be in the interest of people of that country, that this type of corrupt practices and bad administration is put into question. And what happened in Tanzania, that several corrupt politicians had to resign, and there was a major debate in the parliament about how to fight corruption. So aid can be very helpful in also dealing with corruption. But I've also become aware of kind of studies that show that very often the donor countries they fake in a way that they are helping with good governance and dealing with corruption, and the recipient countries fake that they simulate certain institutional reforms which actually don't lead anywhere. So what we need, I believe, is, for instance, a very strong supervision and scrutiny by the civil society, and we should also see that parliaments should become real sort of decision makers in the countries. I'm very much in favor of activities like we have in Finland. We have DEMO, which is an all-party development organization, which is working with parliaments and especially young people, women in developing countries, so that they would be able to practice what they are elected for, which means be a real parliament and to make the government accountable. So I think development aid must again be kind of directed in a new way, but unlike Matti says, a lot of these things are already being done. So it's and in fact he's at the end of Matti, your speech, I think you listed the main priorities, main new orientations of development policy. And it would be a mistake to make this very populistic claim that nothing of that has been done. So, but what you are talking about is the mistakes mainly of the past, and now we have to look into the future, how to remedy the problems that are of course there, but not in the sense that you are saying.
Thank you, Heidi. I think there's a lot of scenes for further discussion here. And I was first think that we discuss about the CSO, NGO role and the new kind of trend on the private sector role in development. But I think we should jump first now to the issue of especially Finnish development aid policy. Because it's quite interesting here because Heidi is the kind of main architect of our current development policy, which was published in 2012. And then Matti you say in your book that you don't really understand this human rights-based approach, what it does mean and what it's all about. So I think we will now show that Heidi, you could maybe tell about what it is about and maybe say a couple of words how you would change it now, how much is valid still, or what things you would change in the program. And then Matti, you can answer to what Heidi now said already and to respond to Heidi's explanation of the current human policy program, and then maybe you can comment then. Okay? Good. Heidi, please.
Well, I think it was obvious that the time had come when all the major players in development aid and development policy have become convinced that no development is possible without a very strong approach of defending human rights. And that's why it was actually quite natural and easy that the new program for the first time defined that it is a human rights-based approach to development. And testing, for instance, what the opinions in the international community now are, I think this has already become mainstream. So it was nothing that we invented, it was there because it was realized that we should get away from this kind of rather technical approach to development, which sometimes did not take into account that the people who were supposed to be the beneficiaries were not made aware of their rights, and the decision makers who should be responsible for realizing of people's rights were not aware of their obligations. So that was quite simple. I don't think that this approach should change. Now I realize that there are people who, very much inspired by Matti's book, by the way, they say that we have to put everything, we have to make a total reshuffle of development policy. Nothing of what has been done previously is good, so we have to do something completely different. And most of the time I feel these people are only saying this because they feel that they would like to reduce the development aid budget. For instance, if you follow the debate in the Foreign Ministry's magazine Kehitysutveckling, you can read a very interesting article by a leading official from the finance ministry who says exactly that as Matti Kääriänen's book shows, there are many, many problems. So now we also have to deal with the problem of misdirecting development finances. And I think it's a very explicit invitation for the next government to reduce the development aid budget. So I think this is a very, very sad result of Matti's criticism to present development aid. But the human rights-based approach, I think almost nobody puts it into question. It is more about how it will be implemented. And then I think one of the key things is that the cooperation with the civil society organizations could be even stronger, because it is the civil society organizations having their partners in developing countries who can be the best guardians of this kind of approach, that people's land rights are not violated, that women are not denied their rights, that indeed natural resources are not robbed and abused. So this is the basic approach. What I would change is perhaps that I would put a little more emphasis on education, because I do think that not anymore so much primary education, but access to secondary and vocational training would be very important to promote. But I wouldn't change very much in the program, but of course I'm the best person to say that. Because it was very much a creation of the process that we led in a very participatory way.
Thank you, Heidi. And now, Matti, you can answer to Heidi, and I put two more questions to you. What do you think about the proposal of the Finnish Development Policy Committee that Finland also should have a development policy law? And what do you think about Heidi's say about that we should speak about aid as a global tax? So not that something that we can relate to how the economy goes up and down, but it should be something fixed, that it's something that is we use for the kind of taking our share of the global responsibility. So please, Matti.
Thank you very much. I was going to comment on that anyways. But here you can see the difference between a civil servant and a politician. Politicians are very, very good in misreading the text if they wish. And Heidi is a champion in that. So I have to start correcting these things. The human rights-based approach, Heidi is right. It's not a new thing. There is nothing new in that. It has been there, I don't know for how long, almost from the very beginning. What I'm saying here is not that human rights don't matter, don't pay any attention, and everything will be fine. You can just forget about it. It's none of your business. I'm not saying that at all. I'm repeating here the words by Professor Martti Koskenniemi, who has actually made that comment openly several times when our development policy papers have been written, but no one has wanted to listen to him. What he's basically saying is that in our present global world, we have so many human rights standards, agreements, international agreements, and so forth, that that whole list of issues that can be classified as a human rights from some perspective is not anymore usable as a guidance to decision making in development cooperation. And as he was using the example that today there are no two wars in the world that both sides would not be justified from the human rights perspective. So even every war is a human rights-based war, if you choose your words in a certain way. That's what Professor Koskenniemi is saying, and that's what I think I also mentioned that example in my book. And the second point here is that if you focus, as your main focus, human rights approach in development cooperation, you tend to forget something much more important, which are the real reasons why the people are poor. You may be going around a factory established or financed or supported by a developing country, and then you start talking about the land rights and this and that and so forth, rights of the people around it. But you don't pay any attention to the bigger picture, which is the position and situation of that big company, capital movements, capital flights, taxation, etc., which created the whole problem to start with. So what Professor Koskenniemi is saying, that where I also agree to, is that we are losing the focus, and that's what I'm trying to say in my book. Let's put the focus back where it should be. I'm not saying that forget about human rights. That's the politicians' misreading, of course. Human rights are important, and they should, of course, should be respected, and almost all the developing countries have been signing the certain universal declarations on those, and they can be supported in observing them. About this aid as a global tax, well, yes, why not? I've said that to make this level playing field a bit more fair, for example, for the small farmers of the developing countries, why don't we start paying subsidies, agricultural subsidies to them as well? It is a taboo in Finland to talk about subsidies of Finnish farmers. We pay them actually $2 billion here, which is twice as much as the whole ODA budget to something like 50,000 farmers in Finland, which makes in the end the whole situation impossible from the perspective of the small farmers of the developing countries. We could take that money as a tax and give it to the farmers of the developing countries. The point is not that. The point is that if we help developing countries, like Professor Bridget is saying, we have made a mess out of it. We have went there, we have defined the problems ourselves, we have defined the solutions ourselves, we have told the developing countries that if you don't follow these instructions, this medicine, structural adjustment, whatever it is, money will not be forthcoming. These are so-called conditionalities, and we have failed very, very badly. That's why we don't achieve the results. From here, I can come to another, which has been a bit disappointment, that is the poor quality of the discussion we have had about development aid. It has been politicized. My point was not here that let's make a political tool of it, but politicians can only focus on the next elections and the monies in the budget, if we are going to get more or less. No one is really interested in what is happening with the real subject issue. And in the case, sorry, now I lost the point where I was going. Yeah, okay. I had a couple other comments on the. Sorry. I got it back. Of development aid. So the whole discussion is the development, like the title of this session, blessing or curse. I tried to start my first intervention saying that things are not black or white in this world. What I'm saying that there are certain ways of doing it right, but most of the ways we have been doing so far have been wrong. I have been following it 40 years. I know it. It's not just a story. I took these 3 studies and examples just to support my own personal views and experience. I have quite a lot of that, unlike many, many others. And that's why what I'm saying that let's pick up those elements which work, which really help, can support the developing countries to come out from there. But just to say that if you are criticizing development aid, you are saying that we should stop it all, it's all bad. You are misreading the book intentionally, and that's something that which I don't really understand why it should be done. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we will proceed now so that we can respond to them, and then we can jump to the next topic, which I would like to speak about what Heidi mentioned already, is also the civil society role and then the private sector role. We have had our 80s and 90s where kind of NGO became in the development policies, and then there's kind of a lot of pressure and a lot of hope on them. And then when it was found that, okay, we still have the problem, they were kind of not the saviors, and then there's a lot of work now in the private sector, there's a lot of worries in the civil society part, what are the conditions, what are the kind of motivations, how you integrate private sector in the development policies, as is currently really strongly done in many international spheres. So I would like to stress that we can comment the others, but also would like to hear from you how you see the civil society cooperation, development cooperation from the balance perspective and the private sector involvement in the development policies. And then after that we go to the Heidi, and you can respond to Matti and then go on also with this civil society private involvement. And you can also reflect a little bit on when we think about the kind of, I think we all agree that we should have a word, that there's no institution such as development aid needed. And we need a lot of structural changes and transformative changes. And there are in the South a lot of different kind of social movements which are searching for the transformative change. I would like you to comment also how development aid could support these changes which are searched by the movement. Teresa, please.
Yeah, thank you. What I feel first, I want to raise a question based on some of the example. Is austerity or cutting the development aid is the response to the problem in Europe or developed countries? I'm not expert on this, but as a development activist, I have some hypothesis. It is after the 2008 economic recession in the Europe, austerity, cutting in the social sector has started. And this is after that recession, the European government and US government has realized we have to control our multinationals. And they suddenly invented that these multinationals flowing capital not in our country, Finland, or some in the tax havens. And you know that UK government, only one UK government is maintaining 70 tax havens. And European Union, OECD, has first started during 2009, BEPS process, base erosion profit shifting process, and Obama government and European Union has realized that we have to grip all these multinationals. They are flowing all the capital from our countries, tax havens, they are evading taxes. And this European Union process has also flaws. What is the flaws? They have started this base erosion profit shifting project only in discussion with G20 countries, not with the poor countries who are the victim of tax havens. Like Bangladesh, they are not discussing with this. Like they are not discussing with Nepal, they are discussing with G20 BRICS. Brazil, India, Russia, South Africa, China. And among all these countries, some of these developing countries, advanced developing countries, now becoming another one tax havens. I want to give you one example. Malaysia, they have a second home program. If you are able to take $300,000 in Malaysia, they will not ask you any questions. They will give you what you call this. They will give you the citizenship and everything. Like if you take $5,100 in US and Canada, they will not ask you how you accumulated this money. They will give the citizenships. And what the issue is that this is the EU and OECD country unilaterally deciding the tax transparencies, unilaterally deciding how the country by country report is happening, that they have the flaws. If a country has the agreement with EU OECD, then they will follow the country by country reporting of multinationals. Say, a country like Bangladesh, we don't have any agreement with OECD and European countries. Why I will follow the country by country reporting? So, if in true sense, if we want to stop the illicit flow, then this has to be discussed in the UN. In UN, there is a tax committee. That mandate have to be enhanced. And there must be a universal standard of bank transparency, tax transparency, and the developed countries, first and foremost, have to come in an agreement that we will stop tax havens. Then you will see how the multinationals, your companies, returning back the taxes to your own countries. So what we are doing, we are putting the cart before the horse. Let's have the MNC, the real horse, before the cart. So this is one of the answers to save money, to make your money in your own country, not to cut in the development aid, not to cut in the social and education sector. This is one answer. So let us raise our voice. The MNCs have to pay their fair share. I'm not against any multinational company. I'm in favor of multinational companies. But these companies cannot be a tyrant. This company cannot rule our state political leaders. These companies cannot pressurize the WTO rules. This is the state. These are our political leaders have to decide. This company, where they are making business, they have to be accountable to this state and political leaders. So this is the answer to have our money for social development. So this is one answer. Second is human right approach. I'm fully agreed on human right approach in development cooperation. It means that it has to bring we cannot look at the development cooperation what we have been looking at the development cooperation decade ago. It means what we have to do, number one principle, that when Finland giving aid to the Bangladesh, it should not be the government own the development aid. It should be the democratic ownership of that aid. It means when there is an aid utilization process, opposition has to be involved, media has to be involved, local government has to be involved. So it is not the matter of government ownership, it is the democratic ownership. Second principle, that decades ago, aid was given to give service delivery. I will give you some cows, I will give you some clothes, I will give you some waters. But we have to give aid now to facilitate the human right approach, to facilitate the right-based approach. What does it mean? Let us take the time. This is not the Finnish people to rescue the Bangladeshi people. This is the Bangladesh political leadership, political state has to take the responsibility of the Bangladeshi poor people. Then what aid will work there? We have to strengthen the social movement. We have to strengthen the civil society so that Bangladeshi people will make their government, politicians, policymakers accountable. So this is the reform we have to bring in the development cooperation in the aid channels. Thank you.
I think Rezo has made some really important points about how this base erosion, profit shifting problem could be addressed globally. And we should really work for the United Nations Tax Committee to take a leading role, because that would be the only way to guarantee a participatory and equal role for those countries who suffer most from the irresponsible tax behavior of multinational companies. And I think it's a good chance that perhaps there might be some kind of new project for, let's say, a UN convention on these things. I know that the Norwegian government has been very active on this, and it will be time perhaps to check what is going on, because that could be accelerated, I think. Also, I would say that now there's some very important legislation underway which links the consumers with the producers in a new way. For instance, now the European Parliament is just going to decide about an important regulation which would make the manufacturers of using certain metals accountable for the origin of those metals, because it has been widely recognized that one of the main problems and reasons for the continuous wars in, for instance, Central Africa and eastern parts of Congo are due to let's say, illegal practices in mining, which lead to financing of paramilitaries and private armies, even other armies, which then terrorize the civilian populations with terrible atrocities. So it's very important that we get this kind of international legislation. I hope that what now is coming out of the European Union will match the level of the US regulation, which it has been the model. And this should be seen as a part of a broader approach which is trying to make businesses accountable. And there are some very important developments in the United Nations Human Rights Council on this. Business and human rights, I think, is an important topic which should aim at putting in place some new kind of rules for the behavior of multinational companies and other companies in our and developing countries. So this is all just to show that that kind of approach could be the basis of development aid, and a lot can be done by supporting movements that are trying to make companies accountable. And I would like to give an example which actually took place, I think it's in Helsinki now, this fashion campaign to try to link the producers of garments in Bangladesh, the poor people who are underpaid and work in underprivileged and dangerous conditions, with the customers who buy those clothes. I think it's called something like fashion. Have you noticed?
Inside Out.
Sorry, you know about it?
It's called Inside Out.
Yeah. So perhaps you can tell us about that kind of campaign, because I think it is very important that we also mobilize people to understand that we can make the producers accountable also by consumer awareness. And yesterday, on Thursday, we had a presentation of this campaign in the European Parliament. And I hope that this will be a broader reaction to the terrible things that happened in Rana Plaza in Bangladesh a year ago. So there's lots of things can be done, and I believe that really to support the civil society organizations to continue to do these things should remain a very important part of development cooperation. But austerity of aid, if I understood well what Rezal is saying, I think this is exactly what is likely to happen in the next Finnish government, and Matti has given great inspiration to the people who want to do that. Sorry to say that.
Thank you. I think Matti, you can now respond, and then you have the people shared, all of you, and then we could have a couple of questions from the audience if you have any comments, and maybe you could have a couple of words on the in and out campaign. But Matti first, please.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if there was anything to respond actually. It was just a consideration of matters. So I don't know if there's anything to comment on.
Okay, good. Then, audience, some questions, comments, notions you have in mind? Okay, yes, please.
So to formulate your questions, if you need help, I can translate.
Just a minute, do you have a microphone? No.
So it's easier to move around. So we can use one here. The audience can use the other one.
This one, yeah, we can use that. The audience, you can take that.
Awesome. I tried to take it. Do you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, my question is more about the meaning of terms that you're using. Like, all you addressed the term aid and what it means, but nobody seemed to question the term development more philosophically. Not to mention the concept of developing and developed countries. From what point of view are countries developed and not enough developed? Is it that kind of language in itself some kind of semantic violence and a representation of an Eurocentric mentality? Therefore, the Western discourse of development is in itself a human rights issue.
another question as well. Please.
Somebody had another question?
I just said that if somebody needs help to formulate the questions, I can interpret.
I can ask a question, but I can't hear the mic here.
Yeah, but speak louder.
Yeah,
We hear you very well.
Cambridge economist Ha-Joon Chang puts in his book, The Bad Samaritans, the claim that Western countries, when they give new loans, give development aid, and put these conditions on these helping measures to developing countries, he claims that the conditions are not designed to help the developing countries, but instead are designed to help the developed countries themselves. I don't really think he makes a claim that it's intentional. It might be subconscious or built into the system or whatever. But in this context, if Chang is right, wouldn't it be kind of redundant to säännellisyys, regulate the multinationals if the problem is the regulators themselves?
Any more questions? Okay, then maybe Matti, you can start to answer.
Yeah, thank you. On this first question, developing country terminological issue, what came to me at least a little bit as a surprise, because of course that's my professional language for the last 40 years, and I'm basing the use of that language to the definitions mainly worked out by OECD DAC. And of course, which is a development assistance committee of OECD. There is of course a problem there, because the OECD DAC is a rich man's club, so the basically developing countries have not been represented there. And if they belong to the group or come out from the group, and what is counted as aid and what is not counted as aid is basically decided by the rich countries themselves. But of course, there is a clear list and clear criteria that which are now, countries are now listed as developing countries and so forth. There's another issue which didn't come up here is that I was kind of expecting someone say that, why are you talking about development aid? Shouldn't it be development cooperation? Isn't this a cooperation? I have been using the word development aid intentionally myself to make the point that this is not a cooperation on an equal basis, where actually the developing countries themselves would have an equal say on what is going to be decided and done. But we are regulating that very, very much with our decisions and conditionality. So it's a donor-driven exercise. It has always been. This relates a little bit to your question there, and I have heard the same argument. This is a philosophical issue again, but of course, those who have power, they normally have also the resources, and they are not making agreements that would not be somehow beneficial to themselves. And I think this is a question of political will, of course, in the end, and what is the role and the power of big multinational companies, for example, in this world. And unfortunately, it is like that their situation and rights have been regulated maybe more strongly in international legislation than the rights and situation of the nation states themselves. So we are in a quite absurd type of a situation that where the companies are more protected than the nations. But as such, as I said, it's a philosophical question. I tend to agree with you, but I'm sure that Heidi doesn't. But, anyway, let the reply for themselves.
Yeah. I have a very much, maybe I have a very much a difference on Western discourse of development, blah, blah, blah. because in our Asian countries, especially in developing countries, if our autocrats, fascist leaders, they want to do anything, they have a very easy reference. Oh, the civil society, they are promoting the Western discourse. So I have to rule them out. I don't think that the development philosophy or the democratic principle, this has no border. We all know UDHR, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The nations have been at war for decades. Muslims have been at war with Christians, Christians have war with others. And 1945, after decades of war, all the nations, all the peoples from religious people, has came to a fact. The Muslims and Christians have to live in peace. Germans and Japans, Americans has to live in peace. There should not be any slavery. There should be free of media, freedom of information. It is the UDHR, Universal Declaration of Principles. And it is the principle of democracy. So, it has no Western, it has no Eastern. If there is a respect to the UDHR and democratic principles, I don't think there will be exploitation and inequalities. And then we have to challenge the two notions. One is the myth of sovereignty. Sovereignty for our rulers, it means giving him or her freedom to exploit his own poor people. And nationalism, it means giving freedom to that bloody rulers and fascists to exploit the people within the boundary. So I don't believe on sovereignty, I don't believe on nationalism. So again, there is no Western discourse of development, there is no Eastern discourse of development. Development is Universal Declaration of Human Rights and democratic principles. The second thing, conditionalities. Yes, conditionalities is there. Most of the time, these conditionalities of the donor government is in favor of their companies. I can give you example from my own countries. So this is one fact. And second fact is that most of the conditionalities comes from the international financial institutions, especially from World Bank, IMF, and Asian Development Bank. And China is coming with a new development bank. Don't consider that China is a progressive development partner. They have their own conditionalities in Africa, they have their own conditionalities in Asia too. Don't consider that India is a very progressive donors and country. They have their own tied up conditionalities. New donors, new imperialist donors are coming up. So, this is the responsibility of our people in developed countries. In our advanced developing countries, to tell our government, aid is aid. Aid is for partnership and cooperation, partnership with the Bangladeshi people. So, don't tie up our aid for the interest of our companies. Thank you.
I think, of course, we could think of new terms to replace what we now talk as developed countries and developing countries, but if anyone can offer perhaps a kind of a how to replace this kind of terminology with something which reflects more the reality, I'm more than happy to discuss that. But I think we can also use them in a rather sort of technical sense and give a certain description of what we mean by that. But I could also say that, and that's a link to the question about the regulators, the Western countries' interests, and in that sense addressing the problem to the regulators of international economy. That of course there are different interests, and you see it in each government. You have a Ministry of Agriculture, you have the Ministry of Trade and Industry, and usually they have different lobbyists that talk to them. And then you have the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, you have the Department of Development Policy, and I would say that there's often a very harsh contradiction between the interests within each donor country. And the same must be true of any so-called developing country, that you have a battle of interests, and some of those interests are very much embedded for strengthening the rights of investors, for instance, with little interest in the rights of people and workers, for instance, or rights of people to healthy environment. But I think one of the keys here is that you have to see through, and you have to make decision making as transparent as possible and regulate the conflicts of interest, so that you have as little as possible dubious connections between politicians and companies or main, let's say, industry interest organizations. Electoral financing is an issue where this is a very real question, that according to democratic principles, this type of obscure connections that are created by, for instance, financial contributions to campaigns are often there just to assure that then there is a kind of a indebtedness by the decision maker towards the holder of that interest. And all this is, I think, very important. And then we are close to addressing the problem of corruption. And I would actually like to know from Rezal that how would you actually see that in a country like Bangladesh, the governance could be changed so that it doesn't entail and encourage corruption. You mentioned that often corruption is something that even relatively poor people have to engage in because of their conditions. But the regulators, I think, should also promote transparency, and that's why, for instance, this type of regulation that regulates the use of minerals in the mining sectors is very important, because it actually forces transparency of the whole production chain.
Thank you, Heidi. I think we will proceed so, as we are running out of time soon, that we can have a last round. Andresa, you could maybe start so that you can answer to Heidi. And I would like you to reflect the two questions and issues as much as you would like to, is the involvement of the private sector in development policy work, and then also the post-2015 framework. How you see that, and especially the kind of universality of those aims, so that the sustainable development aims are supposed to be now universal, so they are aims for all countries in the world. So how you see this universality from the Finnish perspective and the panelist perspective? Thank you.
Well, I'm in favor of private sector involvement, but in economy, any investment, they can't look beyond of the profit. So I feel the private sector investment, but it has to be regulated by private sector, state. But in respect of education, water supply, electricity, I'm afraid that private sector, even freedom to go alone, there should be strong public sector, state investment in essential services like electricity, like water, like infrastructure. This is one. And second thing, the private sector investment, when it will be explained as an investment free space for the multinational companies, then I have $1 million questions. I said that I'm in favor of multinational companies, but it has to be accountable to their original countries. Government, it has to be accountable to the countries where they are operating, and there must be a UN and universal standard of tax transparency and bank transparency. This is regarding the private sector development and multinational companies. Second question related to the corruptions. I see most of the time our country, Bangladesh, has been branded as a number 1 or number 2 or number 3 most corrupt country. I have different explanations. I'm not against the work of Transparency International, but I know that the methodology of branding this corruption is dependent upon perception. Methodology is dependent upon perception. If some business people perceive that you are corrupted, I am corrupted, that cannot be. Then second thing, this Transparency International never said about the big corruptions of the multinational companies. In my country, I can tell you, there is a Norwegian company called Telenor, there is an Egyptian company called Orascom, there is a Singaporean company called Singtel, and Indian company called Airtel. Our government has planned, like your government, I will give you auction for 3G license, 3G license, high-speed internet. And this 4 company has made a syndicate. And they said that if you allow foreign companies, then we will not participate in the auctions. And they made the syndicate, so government has to accept that, okay, I will not allow any foreign company like Vodafone. Vodafone has expressed their interest, they want to compete in the 3G auctions. Vodafone out. Then there was a tax evasion by the Telenor company and Orascom. They have tax evaded a huge amount of around $400 million evading tax through SIM replacement. Government formed a company, that was represented by these companies, and they have found the conclusion that this company did the tax evasion and they have to pay the taxes. Then these companies, through syndicate, said that we will not again participate in the 3G auction if you will not withdraw this claim. Government has to withdraw it. And what happens? We have auctions only for 1 hour. No foreign company allowed. Because of the syndicate pressure of these multinational companies, government has earned only $500 million. And in comparison to that, what happens to the India? Indian government is very much strong. They have auction for 3G 31 days, and they have earned $7 billion. Who are corrupted? Is transparency will go behind these companies of these corruptions? I don't know. Thank you.
Thank you, Reza. Matti.
Yeah, thank you. I think we are running out of time. I try to be very brief, just a couple of comments. On the private sector, of course, the private sector has a key role in development of any society, and especially in developing countries, especially in Africa, which has been suffering from the lack of lively private sector. But as some well-known books, especially I'm referring to Professor Paul Collier's book, The Blundered Planet, Rövätty Planeetta in Finnish, describes that the history has been the robbery of the natural resources by developing countries in good cooperation between the big multinational companies and the corrupt leadership of developing countries. And this is a very good book, giving a lot of concrete examples from the history that how the situation has been. And that is a problem that still remains to be solved. And I know the good list of intentions that Heidi has been referring to. As a good politician, she has to do that all the time. But I must say that for 40 years, it has never been a lack of good plans or strategies or wishes or whatever. What has been the lack of is the results. We haven't seen the results. We haven't seen the change. We haven't changed the structural change in Africa. We haven't seen the agricultural sector to be developed in Africa. So we need to have the results finally. What can be done in this case is also very well described by Paul Collier when he worked out the so-called Natural Resources Charter that gives quite a detailed advice that how to deal with this problem. And that is something also where development cooperation can refocus itself a bit, at what can be done. For example, if we want to organize an auction between big multinational companies who normally have always upper hand because they have the better knowledge, resources and everything. So the agreements that follow, they are never very beneficial to the developing countries. But here we can come into rescue with the development cooperation funds and means and offer our expertise. Norwegians are doing that in the energy sector, and I think that that's a good way of doing a new type of development cooperation, which may be very helpful to everybody. On the post-2015 goals, just a word, it looks bad. It looks bad in this world because what we need here is to have a political will and common view about the future, a common idea about sustainable development, what it could be, and we don't have that. We have a rivalry between various groups and countries and regions in the country which is growing. And also the centralized decision-making system. I've been referring to United Nations. I have been working there for years myself, and I know how weak that structure is. It's just as wrong as the political will of the member states is. And if that will is missing, the United Nations is not going to do anything. So what I'm looking at is basically what the modern communication means can do. Add an increase to the knowledge and information we all have about what is happening in the world, and the increased pressure coming from citizens and consumers, and even in some cases as whole owners, small owners or bigger owners of international companies who can have an influence and impact on their behavior. What governments, I wouldn't put too much hope on the government's willingness and ability to do something. The pressure must come from the citizens, and once the governments don't have a choice, then they will do it, but that may take a time. Situation at the moment, unfortunately, doesn't look that good. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we are already a little bit past our time, so I just like to say that I think there are new promising ways to do better in development cooperation and development policy, especially global rules on businesses are very important. I think our guest from Bangladesh is totally right when she is talking over and over again about the needs of bank transparency and companies' tax transparency. So if someone wants to get results, I think it's good to concentrate on those things. But at the same time, I think we can concentrate on good work in supporting local communities in poor countries so that they get more of a say in their societies about their own lives. And this is the whole essence of the human rights-based approach for me. I'm very open to understanding that Professor Martti Koskeniemi is quite sarcastic about talking about human rights, but what it means is that we have to keep supporting people who are in trouble with sometimes with their own governments who don't give them rights and who suppress their rights of freedom of expression, for instance, or labor unions don't have the right to organize themselves. So I think the post-2015 process is a promise, it's a possibility. So I'm optimistic, even if I see that the challenges are huge, the problems are growing, but there are solutions, small scale and large scale, and that's what I would like to concentrate on.
Thank you all. I would just at the end comment one thing. It's the result you're speaking about the transparency law, and I visited the website of the organization Coast Trust. And I'm surprised because we speak also in the NGO world that everybody should be transparent. And in his organization, you visit the website and you can see all the salaries of all people who are working there, how much money is paid for their mobile phones. I haven't seen any organization doing that for congratulations. And thanks you all for the discussion. Thanks for audience.